Welcome to the Tough Decisions Daily Show with your hosts, Dan and Danae Hanford. As entrepreneurs and real estate investors, we are faced with tough decisions on a daily basis. These tough decisions can either make us or break us. On this show, you will hear from highly successful people sharing their stories behind tough decisions that they have had to make along their journey of success. In every episode, you will be able to learn from the thought processes behind the tough decisions that were made. Some of these decisions will have amazing outcomes and some not so much. So without further ado, your hosts, Dan and Danae.
On the podcast with us today is Rod Khleif. Rod is a multiple business owner and philanthropist who is passionate about real estate, business, and also giving back. As one of the country's top business, real estate, and peak performance luminaries, Rod has owned over 2,000 homes and apartment buildings and has built over 23 businesses in his 40-year business career, several of which have been worth tens of millions of dollars. Welcome to the podcast with us, Rod.
Hey, Dan. Glad to be here. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Hi, Rod. Thanks for being with us. And it's really going to be great to talk to you. We can't wait to kind of hear your story. So if you will, just kind of talk us through a little bit about how you got into business, how you started as an entrepreneur, maybe some of the more interesting things that you've experienced along that journey.
Sure, Danae. Well, let me go back. I immigrated to this country when I was 6 years old, and we ended up in Denver, Colorado. Didn't have much money. I had to wear clothes from the Goodwill. That's all we could afford. And we ate expired food and powdered milk and and I know lots of people had it harder than we did, but I knew I wanted more. And my mom, for us to have extra money, babysat kids. And with her babysitting money, she bought the house across the street when I was 14 for $30,000. And when I was about to graduate from high school, I was 17 actually, she told me she'd made 20 grand in her sleep and the value of that property going up in value in those 3 years. And I said, what? And I immediately decided I was getting into real estate. So I studied and got my real estate broker's license when I turned 18. And, I didn't make any money my first year, maybe 8 grand. My second year, I might have made $10,000. But my third year, I made over $100,000. And so what happened between year 2 and year 3? Well, I met someone that really taught me that mindset and psychology is 80 to 90% of your success in anything. And, I've been now teaching my coaching students and talking about that on my podcast for years because it truly is. 80 to 90% of your success in anything is your ability to take action, to push through fear, to get uncomfortable, and to get back up when you inevitably get knocked down. So, fast forward to today, like you said, I've owned over 2,000 houses and apartment buildings and in 3 states. It's painful to even think about. And in 2006, my net worth went up $17 million while I slept, a little more than the 20,000 that my mom told me about. But there's a punchline, and when you get a big head and you think, I thought I was a real estate god to have, make 17 million while I slept. I did the math on it. It's like over $8,000 an hour, and whenever you get a big head, God or the universe or whatever you believe will smack you down. And for me, that was 2008. In 2008, I effectively lost $50 million. I had a $50 million seminar. I call them seminars because every failure really is a learning experience. And that was my biggest and very humbling. Now, out of the ashes of that, I built a large litigation support company, which I still own today. And, like you mentioned, I've started and built multiple, I think 23, 24 businesses. Some have been worth a lot of money and made a lot of money, and some have been spectacular seminars. And, it's funny, I belong to masterminds. I even put on my own mastermind, but I belong to several. I pay about $65,000 a year to be in 3 masterminds. And one of them, I got to meet Sarah Blakely, the billionaire owner of Spanx, started with $5,000. Now she's a billionaire. And something she told me really stuck with me. And that was that her dad, every day when she got home from school, would ask her what she failed at today. Isn't that an awesome question? What have you failed at today? To push your child to take action. I absolutely love that. But yeah, so that's my story. I spend a lot of time in my podcast, the Lifetime Cash Flow podcast, talking about psychology because, really, if it were just knowledge, that caused a person to become wealthy, there'd be a ton of wealthy librarians and college professors out there. It's really taking action and mindset that causes people to achieve the success that they want and build the life that they want. And so I spend a lot of time on that in my courses and coaching and on my podcast, just because so many people out there will get interested in something and learn everything there is to learn about it, but they never really pulled the trigger. And, it's so frustrating for me. So, happy to dig into that a little more if you guys like.
Yeah, I think the one that I want you to kind of dive into, because it sounds to me like there was more than just one tough decision that was being made around the time where you had lost that $50 million back in 2008.
Sure.
Could you walk us through some of the tough decisions that you had to make during that time frame?
Sure. I'll tell you the toughest was to decide to stop making payments. I had perfect credit. I had American Express black card that I spent about $100,000 a month on. And, I was rolling. I mean, I had all the exotic cars, the Lamborghini, the Maserati and high-end Mercedes, and lived in an $8 million mansion on the beach. And, by all outside purposes was living large. And, I had 800 houses, multiple apartment complexes in Florida here. And, unfortunately, the way that my business model was set up, I had 800 houses, 2 hours one direction and 2 hours the other direction from where I live here in Sarasota, and just was unmanageable. And so the tough decision was, once the market crashed, realizing that I had to sell a house once in a while or had to refinance. Well, in fact, let me back up. The reason that it wasn't cash flowing well, and my focus was on the value. Even though I was at a 30% loan to value, a very low loan to value, I still had to sell a house or refinance a house occasionally to cash flow because of the logistical expenses of managing houses 2 hours in each direction. And then I'll answer your question, but let me pre-frame it. So, if I sent a maintenance guy to fix a house that was an hour away, it would take all day because they'd have to go to the house, see what was wrong, then go to Lowe's or Home Depot, pick up parts, go back, try to fix it, maybe have to go back to Lowe's again. And what would take 30 minutes in an apartment building would take all day in a house. And you multiply that times 800 and it just didn't cash flow. That coupled with the high taxes and insurance here. But back to your question, the tough decision was deciding to stop making payments. I had perfect credit, but when the market crashed, everything just grinded to a halt. You couldn't borrow money. You couldn't sell anything. And that was one of the toughest decisions I ever had to make, was to stop making payments and ruining my credit. My credit's back now, but it was very, very difficult.
Obviously, you learned a lot from that experience, but I'm thinking specifically for someone, beginning or having some of the same goals that you have of owning multiple properties and wanting to get into this as their livelihood. What did you learn from that experience that would possibly help someone just starting out to sort of buffer themselves against another experience like that?
Sure. Well, that's actually why I started my podcast, because I wanted to get the message out there. What was fascinating was, fascinating when I look back on it, painful when I'm in it. But although my single family properties weren't cash flowing, my multifamily were doing just fine and would have survived if I hadn't cross collateralized them with my houses. So, that's the message in my podcast is if you're going to buy property to hold, don't buy houses. Buy at the very least buy plexes and ideally buy larger properties and to focus on cash flow. I wrote a book, and I'll give it to your listeners for free if you like, but I wrote a book, 200 pages about multifamily real estate investing, but the subtitle of the book, it's titled How to Create Lifetime Cash Flow with Multifamily Properties, but the subtitle is The New Rules of Real Estate Investing, and the new rules being focus on cash flow. Don't focus on value. I have students that call me that say, well, I can buy this property for $1 million and it appraised for $2 million 3 years ago. And I say, I don't care what it appraised for. Tell me what the numbers are on the cash flow. Tell me what the NOI is, the net operating income. What's the property's ability to service the debt? That's what's relevant. So, that's the lesson, is to focus on cash flow. And I will tell you, I hate to say it, but we're nearing a contraction if it hasn't already started. And, when the music stops, there will be people that don't find seats. And it's the ones that didn't focus on cash flow, like the high dollar flippers and things of that nature. They're the ones that could have a problem when the market contracts, because when it does, it happens almost overnight.
So somebody right now, let's say they're listening, they want to get started into real estate business. What is the most important thing right now that someone should be focusing on when thinking about trying to start a real estate business, especially right now when
Absolutely.
we're either in the middle of, or not in the middle of, but in the beginning stages of, or getting ready to go into this market correction?
Yeah, well, they should be focused on cash flow. Bottom line, unless you're flipping, if you're a flipper, then I would say focus on the lower price properties, because there'll always be a market for those. But these guys that are flipping $1 million houses, I'm just telling you, when the music stops, they're in trouble. Unless they have multiple exit strategies. That's the only caveat there. If they've got exit strategies that involve renting the property and they've got debt that's long-term enough that they'll be okay. If they've got short-term debt and they don't have a multiple exit strategy, those are the ones that got killed in 2008.
And I guess, just forgive me here for talking this out, but basically a house that, you could upfit or add value to and then turn around and flip within a month or two, all of a sudden, if there's a market correction, you're not going to be able to do that, and you're going to have to hold on to it.
Correct.
So, yeah,
Correct.
You're not going to be able to get that return.
Correct. And those high-priced properties take longer to sell. So, you've got that dynamic as well. So, there are some markets that are fairly insulated, DC area, for example. But, I thought Florida was recession-proof. 80 million baby boomers getting old and getting cold. I thought that was my line. That's how I got investors, and it was the truth. But, we ended up being ground zero. So did LA, so did Vegas, these areas you'd think would flourish from the baby boomers. But by the way, listen, I've got a free book. If your listeners want it, they can just text my name, Rod, to 41411. I mean, it's like a textbook for this business. If you're listening and you're interested in real estate, there's no fluff. It's just total value. I'm happy to, give it to your listeners for free.
Sure, absolutely. So just texting the word Rod to 414141?
No, 41411. Sorry, Rod to 41411. Yeah, we'll give you the book. Like I say, it's 200 pages, every aspect of the real estate business, picking an area, determining if an area is viable, market, submarket, deciding what type of property to buy, how to find it, how to finance it, how to build, how to get the equity, how to syndicate, on and on and on. It really is like a textbook. So,
and most importantly, how not to lose $50 million.
Well, and that's the first chapter. Yep. Yes, it is. And I go into goal setting and the psychology of success as well, because that's just such a critical piece of all of this. Anybody that wants to start something, wants to be an entrepreneur, wants to be a real estate investor, they've got to get past comfort, because, a lot of people are comfortable, and you've got to get outside of comfort to take action. And you've got to push through the fear and any limiting beliefs that you may have, fear of failure, fear of rejection, all these things that we all bump up against, fear of, those are the big ones. So, that's why I spend a lot of time on that, even in the book and certainly on my podcast.
Let's talk a little bit about a tough decision that you've had, maybe, around the same time or maybe since then, that you made the decision and you had a really good outcome. It was maybe a different outcome than you had expected, or maybe a more positive outcome than you had expected, but, you made the decision and it was really the right decision to make.
Well, sure. I'll give you two of them. One of them was starting that litigation support company. I mean, that turned into a $10 million company, and that just, and we helped thousands of families save their homes. We were helping families, get out of foreclosure. And again, that business is still around and does very, very well. So that was a great decision to capitalize, to make lemonade out of lemons. And then the second big decision that turned out very, very positive for me was to start the podcast. I mean, we've been number one in the real estate space on iTunes for almost 2 years. We're over 3.5 million downloads. Who would have thought it would have done that great? I had started it really just to have an avenue to approach investors. And of course, it's done all that, but a whole lot more. And now it's turned into a whole thought leadership platform for me. I do live events. I've got a live event coming up in Chicago in August, 3-day live event with just me teaching this business. I've got a course and coaching program. I never thought I'd do any of that when I started the podcast. In fact, it's kind of funny if you listen to my first interviews, I say, I'll never sell you anything. And I really had never planned to. And of course, I'm a little incongruent now, because now I have course and coaching and live events, but it just turned into this magnificent thing. And I had no idea I would love it as much as I do, educating and helping people, all over the country buy properties. And it's just turned into this, this amazing force. And so,
and I think, Rod, that in the beginning you did create it not to be a sales pitch, not necessarily to sell people with.
No, I totally did. I meant it when I said I'll never sell you anything. I never planned to get up and speak in front of groups of people. I've had 2 sold out events already. This third one's going really well. And I'm been doing 4 to 6 a year now, and I just love it. And I
think the reason why you did it was because the people that were listening to your podcast wanted you to do it. They were like, "No, please, let's do something together."
That's exactly how it happened. I was taking free phone calls from my listeners. I said, call me. We can talk about anything for 30 minutes, no charge, no agenda, no nothing. I just want to help you. And I did almost 1,000 of those calls, and I got so much joy. I mean, like looking behind me, I've got this wall covered with thank you notes. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of thank you notes from people that have bought properties, that have been inspired, that have taken action. And I mean, it's fulfilled me. It's given my life a richness that you just don't get, normally in a regular business environment. So, it's been a blessing. I tell my kids, do what you love and work is play. And for the longest time, I wasn't eating my own cooking, but now I am. I'm really, truly doing what I love. So.
Rod, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about your decision-making process or any strategies that you employ when you're faced with a really tough decision.
Well, I always put it down on paper. Sometimes I'll do something as simplistic as just doing a Ben Franklin and making a list of positives and negatives and looking at it like that. But for me, a tough decision requires clarity. I always look at the worst case. What's the worst that could happen? And then I look at, what's the best case, and I weigh them and just try to look at them from every angle. And I try to determine, who I might counsel with that can give me feedback with no secondary gain. Like who's in my life that I can go talk to that has nothing to benefit from the answer to my decision that can give me counsel. And I'm blessed to have some amazing, brilliant, people in my Rolodex. For those of you that are young, that's a list of names and numbers of people. In my, my database, in my Outlook there, that's better. That'll get them. So I'm blessed to have these people that I can rely on. And again, I'm a huge proponent of masterminds. In Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich book, he talks about the power of a mastermind. And I have my own mastermind as well. In fact, we're meeting in August in Vegas. About $3 billion in assets will be there. But because, whenever you put multiple minds together, you put 2 or 3 minds together, they are greater than the sum of their individual parts, and great things happen. So, those of you listening, I recommend if you've got big decisions, get feedback from people you trust that you have respect for, and get other opinions. I mean, you're going to make your own decision, but the best decision comes when you've involved other people. And, I found, I've got big teams that work for me. And, I used to be a control freak, and I'd make all the decisions. Nobody can be as smart as me and do it. Let me make all the decisions. I've found that, frankly, these people can do a better job than you can. But you need to empower them. You need to validate them. You need to allow them to contribute, and amazing things happen. So.
Rod, what book would you recommend to our audience that you've read and that's helped you with your decision making?
I mean, there's so many great books, but relating specifically to decision, I'll just list some of the books that I give to my coaching clients. The Slight Edge, how small decisions can have a huge impact on your life. Jack Canfield's Success Principles, fantastic book. Anything, frankly, by Jack I love relating to business. Just gave him Who Moved My Cheese. That's a great one relating to decisions because it relates to change. There's 3 of them. Those are 3 awesome books right there. And certainly Who Moved My Cheese is a great book for decisions to help you deal with change, because life is change. The only thing constant in life is change. And frankly, the most successful people in the world are okay with embracing it and pushing through it and not letting it, the fear cripple them.
The mindset about change and new things is really important. So I think that's a huge part of making decisions, just being able to and willing to look at things differently and willing to consider something different.
Yeah, the emotion you bring to that decision-making process is critical. If you're coming at it from a fearful place, it'll be the wrong decision. You need to come at it from a powerful, empowered place, and then it'll be the right decision, an informed place. And so, what you said, Danae, is absolutely accurate. Your mindset as you approach that decision-making process, you need to be in an excited, passionate, empowered place, because otherwise you're going to make the wrong decision if it's coming from fear.
So let's shift gears here a little bit, Rod, and talk about the most exciting place that you've traveled. 'Cause I know you've done a lot of traveling, or the most extravagant purchase that you've made. And I know you've already listed some things that you've purchased, back in the 2000 era or whatever. But what would you say is something more recent that you have either purchased or somewhere you have traveled or something you have done with the money that you've made up to this point?
Well, what's funny is that $8 million house I built on the beach, I lost that, and because God's got a sense of humor, I now live in a compound that's even nicer, frankly. And on the bay, I've got 6 buildings. It's spectacular. It's like a park. And because God's got a sense of humor, I can see my old house across the bay. So I would say this compound has just been a gift from the gods. We have, just tons of buildings and a guest house, and it's just spectacular. So but as far as travel, my favorite place we went last year was the Amalfi Coast in Italy. We took a boat ride from Positano to Capri, and I told my wife, this is one of the greatest days of my life. Just spectacular. Be out there on the water with the love of my life and see the villages on the hillsides and spend the day in Capri. It was just spectacular. And we're going.
What's the next item on your bucket list? Obviously, those are really good things too, and really exciting. Yeah. And a lot of people might have those things on their bucket list. But what's the next thing on your bucket list right now?
Well, I believe in visualizing to manifest what you want. It's a shame we couldn't get into that because I really would have been able to add value to your listeners. But I believe in visualizing what you want as if you have it with gratitude. And I have vision boards behind me. I do it every morning. I do a little meditative thing, and I've got some things that are there that are important to me. I'd love to fly privately at some point. I've done it on a rental basis, but I'd love to have my own jet. So that's a big one. That's something I'd love to have. And I mean, it's one of those, who knows if I'll ever pull the trigger on it, but like the good book says, without a vision, the people perish. You need a vision for the future. You need to have things that push you and drive you and compel you to take action. So I'm looking at a picture of a jet above my monitors here.
That's so funny, Rod, because on my desktop screen is a picture of a Hawker 800 XP
there you go.
jet myself. So we have a very similar item on our bucket list. That's awesome. Well, Rod, how can the listeners reach out to you to start to follow you and get some more information about you?
Well, if you're into real estate, I've got a multifamily Facebook group that's killing it. We're at almost 17,000 members. You just go to multifamilycommunity.com and it's a direct link. But my website has got tons of free materials, books and articles and videos and everything else. And that's rodkhleif.com, RODKHLEIF as in Frank.com. If you're interested in spending 3 days with me, there's no outside speakers trying to sell you stuff. I'll be in Chicago, August 24th, 25th, and 26th. And you just go to multifamilybootcamp.com. I mean, tickets are stupid cheap. I mean, it's not about the money to get people to come. So, awesome opportunity to learn the multifamily business if you're interested in multifamily. But lots of entrepreneurial type stuff and real estate stuff on my website.
Well, thank you so much again for being with us on the podcast today, Rod. Look forward to having you on in the future as well.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you having me. Take care.
Do you want to nominate a highly successful entrepreneur or real estate investor to be a guest on this show? Email us at dan@toughdecisions.net. Help us by spreading the word about our show with your friends. And also take time right now to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or your favorite platform. You've been listening to The Tough Decisions Show.